The most persistent lie told about Mennonite communities is that they reject modern life out of humility. But the reality is far more calculated. What appears as simplicity is actually one of the most sophisticated systems of social control still functioning in the Western world. What outsiders find shocking, insiders accept as normal. Clothing is a moral test. In many Mennonite communities, clothing is not an expression of modesty. It is an instrument of surveillance. The Ordnung specifies not just what may be worn, but how it must be constructed. The width of a hem, the presence or absence of buttons, the type of fastener permitted. Hooks instead of buttons are not a quaint tradition. They are a deliberate rejection of perceived vanity and worldliness. A zipper can trigger church discipline. A decorative stitch can raise suspicion. Clothing becomes a visible moral ledger, readable at a glance by anyone in the community. The real friction emerges when these standards are enforced unevenly. Women in particular bear the brunt of scrutiny. A slightly altered dress pattern, a store-bought fabric deemed too modern, or a head covering that shifts with age or hairstyle can invite correction. These corrections are rarely gentle. They come in the form of quiet conversations, withdrawn fellowship, or public admonishment during church meetings. Compliance restores peace. Resistance isolates. Behind this rule is a deeper fear. That visual difference leads to ideological difference. Elders understand that clothing is the first place individuality leaks out. Control the appearance, and you slow the spread of independent thought. The shock for outsiders is not that Mennonites dress plainly. It's that clothing functions as a gatekeeping mechanism, separating the obedient from the suspect. Technology is allowed only when it serves authority. Contrary to popular belief, Mennonites are not anti-technology. They are anti-unsupervised autonomy. Tractors, cell phones, computers, and industrial equipment may all be permitted, but only under strict conditions that reinforce existing power structures. A business owner may use advanced machinery if it benefits the community economically. A young person using the same technology for personal exploration may be disciplined. Cell phones are a particularly revealing case. In some Mennonite groups, phones are allowed only if they lack internet access, cameras, or social media. In others, phones are permitted for work but forbidden in the home. The rule is not about technology itself. It is about controlling information flow. Independent access to news, alternative theology, or former members' testimonies threatens the narrative stability of the group. What outsiders miss is how these rules shift without notice. A tool allowed one year may be banned the next, following a closed-door elders meeting. There is no appeals process. Compliance is expected without explanation. The shock is not restriction. It is the arbitrariness. Technology becomes a privilege granted by authority, not a neutral tool, reinforcing dependence and discouraging dissent. Leaving is allowed, but returning is conditional. Mennonite communities often claim that membership is voluntary. Technically, this is true. No one is physically restrained from leaving, but the conditions attached to return are so severe that departure functions as a near-permanent exile. Once baptized, a decision often made under intense social pressure in late adolescence, leaving the church activates a complex system of relational punishment. This system is known as Meidung, or shunning. It is not always total silence. More often, it is selective withdrawal. Shared meals cease, business relationships dissolve, family interactions become strained or formal. Parents may still speak to children, but affection is ration. Siblings may acknowledge each other without warmth. The goal is not cruelty, it is correction through deprivation. The hidden truth is that return is not about belief, it is about submission. Those who leave and later seek to come back must publicly confess not just doctrinal error, but rebellion against authority. Questions are treated as pride. Trauma is reframed as stubbornness. The community welcomes back the compliant, not the healed. Outsiders see forgiveness. Insiders experience conditional acceptance. Marriage is a community contract, not a private choice. Marriage within Mennonite life is regulated to a degree that surprises even seasoned observers. Courtship follows unwritten but rigid protocols, approved social settings, supervised interactions, and an expectation of endogamy. Marrying within the faith. Romantic autonomy is discouraged because marriage is not seen as a personal milestone, but as a structural necessity for community continuity. The pressure intensifies for women. Marriage is closely tied to spiritual legitimacy and economic security. Remaining single beyond a certain age invites speculation and pity. Marrying outside the community often results in loss of membership, strained family ties, and diminished standing. Even when such marriages are technically permitted, the social consequences are severe enough to function suppression as deterrence. What is rarely acknowledged is how little room exists for incompatibility or abuse. Divorce is heavily stigmatized, even in cases of emotional or physical harm. Endurance is spiritualized. Silence is rewarded. The rule preserves stability on the surface, but at significant psychological cost. The shock lies not in traditional values, but in how completely individual well-being is subordinated to communal optics. Questioning doctrine is treated as moral failure. Mennonite theology emphasizes humility, but in practice, questioning is often interpreted as defiance. Doctrinal boundaries are maintained not through open debate, but through repetition and social reinforcement. Sermons rarely invite discussion. Church meetings are structured to affirm consensus, not explore uncertainty. Those who raise theological concerns are often counseled privately, then monitored. This creates a culture where doubt is internalized as shame. Young members learn quickly which questions are safe and which invite suspicion. Over time, intellectual curiosity is narrowed. The Ausbund and inherited interpretations are treated as settled truth, even when historical context suggests otherwise. Divergence is not engaged, it is corrected. The deeper reason for this rule is institutional memory. Mennonite history is marked by persecution, schism, and survival through cohesion. Leaders fear that open questioning will reopen old fractures, but the cost is high. Members who think differently learn to self-censor or leave entirely. Outsiders see unity. Insiders feel trapped between honesty and belonging. Economic independence is quietly discouraged. Mennonite communities publicly celebrate hard work and self-sufficiency, yet true economic independence is treated with suspicion. The Ordnung often restricts the types of businesses members may operate, the scale at which they may grow, and, most critically, who they may hire. A business that becomes too profitable, too visible, or too entangled with outsiders can trigger intervention from church leadership. Success is tolerated only so long as it does not produce leverage outside communal control. The friction emerges when individuals attempt to translate skill into autonomy. A carpenter who expands beyond local contracts, a farmer who adopts efficient distribution channels, or a shop owner who advertises online may be quietly warned that they are drawing attention. The language is spiritual, but the concern is structural. Financial independence reduces reliance on the community, and reliance is a core mechanism of cohesion. Behind closed doors, elders understand this well. Economic limitation is not about humility, it is about preventing exit. Members who are financially dependent think twice before questioning authority or leaving altogether. Outsiders see simplicity. Insiders experience a ceiling placed deliberately overhead. Education is permitted only up to the point of threat. Formal education in Mennonite life is tightly bounded. Primary schooling is encouraged, basic literacy is essential, and practical skills are valued. But education that cultivates critical thinking, historical analysis, or exposure to competing worldviews is often curtailed. Higher education is viewed not as enrichment, but as a risk factor. Young people who express interest in college are frequently counseled against it. The argument is framed spiritually. Higher learning leads to pride, doubt, and estrangement from the faith. In reality, it leads to comparison. Education introduces alternative social models, exposes historical inconsistencies, and weakens the assumption that the Ordnung is the only viable way to live. The long-term impact is psychological narrowing. Members learn to distrust their own curiosity. Intelligence is redirected towards sanctioned labor, not inquiry. Those who pursue education anyway often do so, knowing it may cost them their place in the community. The shock is not anti-intellectualism. It is the calculated boundary placed just before independence becomes possible. Mental health struggles are spiritualized, not treated. Depression, anxiety, and trauma exist in Mennonite communities at rates comparable to the general population, yet the framework for addressing them is radically different. Mental health struggles are frequently interpreted as spiritual weakness, lack of submission, or unresolved sin. Professional counseling is often discouraged, especially if it involves outsiders unfamiliar with Mennonite norms. Instead, individuals are urged to pray more, work harder, and submit more fully to authority. This response may offer temporary structure, but it silences legitimate distress. Those who continue to struggle risk being labeled difficult or unstable. The community's emphasis on endurance leaves little room for vulnerability that cannot be quickly resolved. The unwritten rule is clear: suffering is acceptable so long as it does not disrupt order. The real reason this persists is fear. Fear that acknowledging psychological harm would expose systemic pressure points. Outsiders admire resilience. Insiders learn to bury pain where it cannot be seen. Conflict resolution is handled privately, not fairly. When conflict arises in Mennonite communities, it is rarely addressed through transparent or neutral processes. Disputes are handled internally, often by the same elders who enforce the rules. There is no independent mediation, no formal record, and no expectation of equal footing. Authority is assumed to be morally correct by default. This creates an imbalance that favors leaders and established families. Those with social capital receive gentler treatment. Those without it are corrected more harshly. Appeals are discouraged, as persistence is interpreted as rebellion. Public airing of grievances is considered sinful, regardless of the grievance itself. The result is a culture of quiet resentment. Members learn that peace is achieved not through justice, but through silence. The shock for outsiders is not that conflict is avoided, it's that resolution is secondary to preserving hierarchy. Community reputation overrides individual truth. Perhaps the most consequential rule is the prioritization of communal reputation over individual experience. Scandals are minimized, abuses are reframed, and uncomfortable truths are managed internally to avoid drawing outside scrutiny. The community's image as peaceful and righteous is treated as a shared asset that must be protected. This is where many of the darkest frictions surface. Victims of wrongdoing, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, or worse, are often urged to remain quiet for the sake of the church. Speaking out risks not only personal fallout, but collective shame. The burden of preservation falls on those already harmed. The deeper reason for this rule lies in historical memory. Mennonites survived centuries of persecution by closing ranks, but survival tactics calcified into habits that now protect institutions over people. Outsiders see harmony. Insiders carry the cost. Obedience is valued more than sincerity. In Mennonite life, obedience is not merely encouraged. It is treated as the highest spiritual currency. Public conformity carries more weight than private conviction. A member who struggles silently but follows the ordnung precisely is viewed as faithful, while someone who openly wrestles with belief, even in good faith, is seen as destabilizing. This creates a moral inversion where appearance of submission outweighs honesty. The unwritten rule is that sincerity becomes dangerous when it disrupts unity. Confession is welcomed only if it leads to alignment, not change. Those who express doubts are often counseled towards silence rather than understanding. Over time, members learn to separate inner belief from outward behavior, cultivating a dual consciousness that allows survival within the system. The deeper reason is institutional efficiency. Obedience is easy to measure. Sincerity is not. Elders can enforce visible compliance, but cannot regulate internal faith without risking fracture. Outsiders see disciplined devotion. Insiders learn that truth must be filtered through acceptability. Leadership is not chosen, it is inherited. Mennonite leadership is often presented as humble service, yet in practice, it is shaped by lineage, reputation, and long-standing family influence. Bishops, ministers, and deacons may be selected through nominally spiritual processes, but the pool of acceptable candidates is narrow and predictable. Certain families produce leaders generation after generation. This creates a quiet aristocracy. Decisions made behind closed doors tend to reflect the interests and worldview of those already embedded in power. Those from less influential family, or those with unconventional perspectives, rarely advance regardless of competence or character. Leadership becomes less about discernment and more about continuity. The friction emerges when authority goes unquestioned for decades. Without rotation or accountability, interpretations of doctrine harden into personal rule. Outsiders assume egalitarianism. Insiders understand that power, once acquired, rarely leaves the same hands. Gender roles are enforced through spiritual language. Mennonite communities often frame gender roles as complementary, but the lived reality is rigid hierarchy. Men occupy all formal positions of authority. Women are tasked with submission, domestic labor, and moral maintenance of the family. These expectations are enforced not through force, through constant theological reinforcement. Deviation is costly. A woman who speaks too assertively, delays marriage, or prioritizes personal ambition may be labeled rebellious or unfeminine. Even when rules are not explicitly stated, social correction is swift. Praise is reserved for self-denial. Independence is reframed as pride. The deeper issue is not tradition. It is control over reproduction and continuity. By regulating women's roles tightly, the community stabilizes family structures and limits exposure to alternative identities. Outsiders see simplicity. Insiders experience confinement disguised as virtue. Outside relationships are strategically limited. Mennonites are encouraged to be polite to outsiders, but intimacy is discouraged. Deep friendships, mentorships, or emotional reliance on non-members are viewed as threats to loyalty. The rule is subtle. Interaction is allowed, influence is not. Over time, members internalize a boundary that restricts emotional investment beyond the community. This limitation becomes especially painful during crisis. Those facing doubt, grief, or abuse are often cut off from external support networks that could offer perspective or assistance. Turning outward is framed as betrayal. Turning inward is framed as faith. The real reason for this rule is containment. External relationships introduce alternative narratives that weaken the community's interpretive monopoly. Outsiders see insularity. Insiders feel the walls closing in during moments they most need space. Faith is treated as static, not living. Mennonite doctrine is preserved as something to be guarded, not developed. Change is equated with erosion. Practices justified centuries ago under persecution are maintained long after their original context has vanished. Adaptation is viewed as capitulation to the world, rather than discernment. This creates a faith frozen in time. Younger generations inherit rules without understanding their origin. When inconsistencies arise, they are smoothed over with appeals to tradition rather than examined. The Ospan becomes artifact as much as guide. The consequence is spiritual stagnation. Members who feel their faith evolving have no sanctioned outlet for growth. They must either suppress it or leave. Outsiders admire steadfastness. Insiders confront a faith that does not move with them. Church discipline is both public and private. In Mennonite communities, a discipline is a carefully calibrated tool designed to enforce conformity. It operates on two levels: private counseling and public correction. Private meetings with elders are intended to redirect behavior quietly, but repeated infractions or perceived stubbornness escalate to public admonishment during church gatherings. The goal is not shame for its own sake, but demonstration, an example to deter others. The friction arises because these sessions are never neutral. The accused must navigate not only the correction itself, but also the subtle judgments of peers. Even minor transgressions, questioning a practice, using forbidden machinery, or altering a dress pattern can escalate if interpreted as defiance. Members internalize constant surveillance, learning early that deviation has social, spiritual, and sometimes economic consequences. Behind this system lies a historical logic. Mennonite communities survived persecution by enforcing strict internal cohesion. Discipline is a modern extension of that survival mechanism. Outsiders see community accountability. Insiders live under the pressure of unrelenting scrutiny. Shunning extends beyond the individual. Meidung, or shunning, is not merely a punishment for the individual who transgresses. It radiates outward to family, friends, and associates. A member who is disciplined may find relatives and business partners subtly withdrawing support or affection. This creates a networked form of control where obedience is incentivized through relational bonds, not just doctrinal compliance. The social calculus is complex. Parents who advocate for a rebellious child may themselves face whispers of criticism. Siblings who maintain normal interaction risk suspicion of complicity. In effect, the rules operate like a lattice. Each node is connected, ensuring that the consequences of deviation ripple far beyond the immediate offender. The underlying mechanism is containment. By embedding punishment within social structures, elders minimize rebellion while reinforcing the invisible power of the ordinance. Outsiders see harmony. Insiders understand that loyalty is enforced relationally, not simply through commands. Marriage approval can override personal desire. Mennonite marriage is not merely about romantic compatibility. It is a communal decision, guided by elders and social expectation. Couples often seek informal approval before engagement. An outright refusal from leadership can halt a courtship entirely. Individual desire is subordinate to perceived spiritual and social fitness. This control extends to the conduct of the courtship itself. Visits are supervised, communication is restricted, parental guidance is not advisory, it is directive. The pressure to conform creates intense internal tension, particularly for those who feel genuine love outside sanctioned norms. Rejecting this structure risks isolation or excommunication. The deeper rationale lies in continuity. By controlling union formation, leaders stabilize family structures, maintain doctrinal purity, and limit exposure to secular influence. Outsiders see romance. Insiders navigate a system where love must pass a bureaucratic spiritual audit. Work assignments are social tools, not just labor. Labor within the community is assigned not only for economic efficiency, but as a method of social conditioning. Tasks are distributed to reinforce hierarchy, demonstrate obedience, and cultivate interdependence. Assignments are rarely random. They reflect perceived character, loyalty, and standing. This creates subtle pressure. Those who excel in visible, valued tasks gain social capital. Those who resist or perform poorly are monitored more closely, disciplined more quickly, and given assignments that reinforce humility and compliance. Work becomes an instrument of of social engineering, a tangible metric of allegiance. The long-term effect is psychological. Members learn that every action, even seemingly neutral labor, carries social and spiritual weight. Outsiders see industriousness. Insiders understand that work is inseparable from conformity. Community rituals are non-negotiable anchors. From baptism to communion to church singing, rituals are compulsory and meticulously observed. Deviation, arriving late, improper posture, incorrect hymn participation is noted and often corrected. These rituals are not merely symbolic. They serve as repeated reinforcement of obedience, hierarchy, and collective identity. The friction lies in the rigidity. Even well-intentioned newcomers or youth may stumble. Correction is swift, personal, and sometimes shaming. Participation is enforced as a form of social conditioning, internalizing rhythm, hierarchy, and communal expectation through repeated structured action. The underlying purpose is cohesion. Rituals act as anchors, aligning individual behavior with community norms in ways words alone cannot achieve. Outsiders see devotion. Insiders experience unyielding structure that defines every facet of public presence. Religious texts are interpreted, not questioned. Within Mennonite communities, sacred texts like the Bible and the Ausbund are never approached as open-ended sources for debate. Interpretation is tightly controlled by elders who present readings as definitive. Individual questioning is discouraged, and alternative readings, even those rooted in scholarship, are treated with suspicion or outright rejection. The emphasis is on absorption, not analysis. This creates an environment where members learn to defer intellectual curiosity to authority. Biblical passages, hymns, and doctrinal commentaries are memorized and applied, but rarely interrogated. Even subtle deviations in interpretation can invite private admonishment or public correction. Spiritual life becomes a series of prescribed mental exercises rather than a space for exploration. The hidden friction stems from historical memory. Mennonites survived centuries of persecution by minimizing internal debate. What outsiders perceive as humility is, in fact, a mechanism to preserve orthodoxy and social cohesion. Insiders experience intellectual confinement masquerading as devotion. Youth are monitored until they leave or comply. Mennonite communities track the behavior, speech, and affiliations of children and teenagers with meticulous care. From early adolescence, youth are expected to adhere to social norms in dress, labor, courtship, and speech. Deviations, even minor ones like a hairstyle, a word, or a joke deemed worldly, are recorded mentally and sometimes formally by elders. The pressure intensifies during Rumspringa or other periods of semi-liberation. Youth are allowed limited exposure to the outside world, but they are observed constantly. Elders and family members watch for signs of rebellion or attraction to non-Mennonite influence. Social, spiritual, and familial consequences loom over every choice. This surveillance creates a paradox. Freedom is granted only to reinforce obedience. Those who resist or explore too widely risk shunning, restriction, or diminished standing. Outsiders see vibrant youth culture. Insiders live under persistent oversight that shapes choices long before they reach adulthood. Hospitality and charity are conditional. Mennonite norms valorize hospitality and charitable work, but these acts are bounded by obedience and conformity. Assistance is extended primarily to fellow members and often contingent on demonstrating proper faith and humility. Those who act independently, give to outsiders without approval, or challenge communal hierarchies are sometimes criticized or rebuked. This conditionality extends to everyday interactions. Hosting a meal, sharing resources, or providing labor is less about generosity than signaling alignment with the ordinance. Acts of kindness outside sanctioned channels can be interpreted as attempts at self-promotion or subversion. The deeper mechanism is social reinforcement. Generosity binds members, ensuring that even benevolent acts serve communal cohesion. Outsiders see kindness. Insiders learn that charity is also a test of loyalty and alignment. Health decisions are mediated by the community. Medical care within Mennonite life is often filtered through elders or trusted community members. Decisions about surgery, vaccinations, and treatment protocols may involve consultation with spiritual authorities rather than relying solely on personal or family judgment. While some families navigate modern medicine freely, others defer heavily to communal norms. The friction becomes apparent when individual health needs conflict with tradition. A parent may hesitate to authorize treatment for a child if it appears too worldly, or a young adult may delay preventive care to avoid contradicting advice from elders. The cost of deviation is framed spiritually. Doubt or disobedience is morally risky. This practice ensures conformity even in private, intimate decisions. Outsiders see prudence. Insiders navigate a delicate balance between personal welfare and communal expectation. Emotional expression is strictly guided. Feelings, anger, sadness, fear, even affection, are tightly monitored in Mennonite life. Public displays are regulated by etiquette and spiritual framing. For example, anger must be tempered by humility. Grief may be expressed only in forms approved by tradition. Affection between men and women outside sanctioned relationships is forbidden. The consequence of deviation is social sanction. Expressing inappropriate emotion in public may invite correction, gossip, or withdrawal of support. Children learn early that certain expressions are unsafe. Adults internalize emotional regulation as survival. Over time, members develop highly controlled affect, sometimes at the cost of mental and relational health. The purpose is containment. By regulating the emotional landscape, leaders maintain order and predictability. Outsiders see composure and serenity. Insiders experience the quiet suppression of natural impulses, a constant negotiation between feeling and acceptability. The threat of excommunication hangs over every choice. In Mennonite communities, baptism is not just a spiritual milestone, it is a binding contract. Once a member is baptized, every major decision is observed through the lens of loyalty. Excommunication, the ultimate form of Maidung, is rarely declared lightly, but its possibility influences nearly every action. From business dealings to social interactions, from marriage to minor disagreements, the unspoken question is always, will this choice be acceptable to the church? The process is often opaque. Elders consult privately, decisions are made behind closed doors, and the reasons may never be fully communicated. Even minor perceived infractions, questioning an interpretation, adopting a forbidden practice, or forming a relationship outside approval can accumulate into grounds for permanent separation. Fear of excommunication keeps members in line without overt coercion. The hidden truth is that this looming threat is a psychological tool as much as a disciplinary one. Outsiders may see freedom and simplicity. Insiders live with constant awareness that deviation could sever their spiritual, social, and familial ties permanently. Historical narrative is controlled to maintain identity. Mennonite communities meticulously manage their own history. Stories of persecution, migration, and martyrdom are taught in ways that reinforce obedience and collective identity. Conflicting accounts, reinterpretations, or critical perspectives are discouraged. Members are trained to see themselves as heirs of a persecuted but faithful lineage, where conformity equals survival. This selective narrative extends into daily life. Disobedience is not just rebellion, it is framed as betrayal of history itself. Elders use collective memory to guide decisions, enforce norms, and correct perceived moral drift. Deviating from approved interpretations is treated as undermining centuries of survival. The deeper friction is subtle but powerful. Historical consciousness becomes a tool of social control. Outsiders see resilience and pride. Insiders understand that the past is curated to preserve present hierarchy. Selective literacy and information access. While basic literacy is taught, critical literacy, accessing alternative viewpoints, secular literature, or broader media, is often restricted. Reading materials are carefully screened, and even simple exposure to outside perspectives can trigger suspicion. Newspapers, the internet, and popular media are filtered to prevent ideological contamination. The impact is psychological and social. Members are taught to rely on the community for knowledge and interpretation, reinforcing dependence on authority. Curiosity about the wider world becomes an internal conflict, creating tension between personal interest and communal loyalty. The purpose is clear. Information control reinforces conformity and limits the spread of disruptive ideas. Outsiders see education and literacy. Insiders experience a narrow, curated lens that shapes thought and behavior from childhood onward. Spiritual hierarchy trumps family bonds. In Mennonite life, loyalty to the church often outweighs biological family ties. Parents are expected to correct children harshly if necessary. Spouses are subordinate to church counsel in serious disputes. Elders may intervene in family matters under the guise of spiritual oversight. Personal relationships are continually measured against spiritual obedience. This hierarchy produces profound internal tension. Members may love their family deeply, yet feel compelled to report, correct, or oppose them to remain in good standing. Disobedience risks not just individual punishment, but disruption of the family's collective standing in the church. The hidden friction is relentless. Emotional bonds exist, but they are conditional. Outsiders perceive strong family structures. Insiders navigate constant negotiation between affection and allegiance. Cultural conformity overrides individual talent. Mennonite communities value hard work and skill, but personal talent is only celebrated when it aligns with communal norms. Exceptional abilities in music, art, or leadership may be downplayed if they encourage individual visibility or personal ambition. Those who stand out too much risk correction, marginalization, or being pressured to redirect their gifts toward collective sanctioned purposes. The friction here is deeply personal. Talented members learn to hide or redirect abilities to avoid attracting scrutiny. Creativity becomes a tool for service rather than self-expression. Over time, the community produces highly capable individuals whose potential is always channeled through conformity. The underlying mechanism is preservation. Exceptional talent that challenges uniformity is quietly contained. Outsiders see industriousness and skill. Insiders understand that personal achievement must never overshadow communal expectation. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.